Is Russia really experiencing a fuel crisis, or is this just another story being exaggerated by Western media? Well, my name is Johnny, I'm from England, but I live here in Moscow, and I can say that yes, the fuel crisis is absolutely real. Over the last few weeks, especially since the 18th of June 2026, when Ukrainian drones hit the Moscow oil refinery in Kapotnya, there have been shortages, there have been long queues, purchase restrictions, and substantial increases in petrol prices in many parts of the country. Now, today, when I'm filming this, is the last week of July. So it's been around 6 weeks, and here in Moscow, the situation is already much better than it was. Just a month ago, or about a month ago, I saw kilometer-long queues of people lining up to get their fuel. Muscovites are waking up early in the morning to fill up their cars, and thankfully in Moscow that crisis is now over. In fact, you can see behind me there's a petrol station right there, no queues at all. But the truth is that the severity of the problem now depends entirely on where you are. In many places outside the capital, people are still struggling to find reliable fuel. It exists, but maybe not at the same place you got your fuel from last week. And maybe last week you were restricted to just 30 litres of petrol each, and now it's 20 litres. So many people outside of Moscow are very much still dealing with very strict restrictions, uncertain supplies, and of course higher prices. So this video is not a story about Russia suddenly grinding to a halt. Of course, you can see the roads are not empty, you can see taxis still operating, and most people are just continuing their normal lives as before. But this video is about a massive form of disruption that has made an essential product, petrol, less reliable and more expensive, while costing millions of people hours and hours of their lives. But how does one of the world's largest oil producers end up with a petrol shortage in the first place? Let's begin with that, and I'm going to film this entire video in front of different petrol stations all around Moscow. Crude oil has to be extracted, transported to a refinery and processed. Refineries turn this crude oil into petrol, diesel, aviation fuel, and other usable products. Those products then have to be stored and transported across an enormous country before they reach individual petrol stations like the one behind me here. This is the company Т-Банк. Now, Russia is not running out of crude oil. The problem is that part of the infrastructure needed to turn that oil into fuel, the refineries, quite a lot of them have been taken out of operation. Now, the immediate trigger for this was a series of strikes on Russian refineries and other parts of the country's fuel infrastructure. And by early July, Russia's petrol output had fallen to the equivalent of around 65% of average seasonal consumption. Now, the crude oil, of course, still exists. It's still under the ground, but the country has started producing substantially less of the finished petrol that is actually needed to put into a car to drive it away. And that's how a major fuel producer can experience a fuel crisis. Having the raw materials is not enough if the facilities that process and distribute it cannot meet everyday demand. And of course, this fuel crisis does not necessarily mean that every petrol station in Russia has run dry at exactly the same time. One station may continue operating while another stops selling a particular grade, for example. Some drivers at some petrol stations may be limited to 20 or 30 litres each. Sales into cans may be prohibited. People have to travel further to find fuel, or perhaps they just have to wait longer than usual. a station can receive a delivery and begin selling again, while another station runs short later that day. So the problem is not really that the country is running out of petrol, that petrol's completely disappeared. That's absolutely not the problem. It's that obtaining it becomes less reliable and more time consuming and just more expensive as you have to travel around the city to find the fuel that you need. And that distinction is particularly important here in the capital, here in Moscow, because here in Moscow you can see the petrol stations behind me. They're very calm. They don't have a shortage right now. Things here are very relaxed. Everyone can get what they need. In other parts of Russia, outside of Moscow, it's not always as positive. So as you can see from what I'm wearing, got no microphone or anything, I'm just filming this on my phone. This is not the day that I'm filming this video, but I'm just in this area. It's Volgogradsky Prospect, and I walked past this petrol station and you can see it's totally closed, which is strange because I want to say 2 or 3 weeks ago rather, lots of the petrol stations were closed, but now they've almost all reopened as Moscow has been, you know, given a lot of petrol from all over the country. It's been prioritized, but this one is still closed, and it's right on a major prospect, on like a major highway. So I'm filming this video just opposite a petrol station here in relatively central Moscow, and whatever the situation looks like today, this is just one location. It's just one location in one part of an enormous city. It doesn't represent every petrol station in Moscow, of course, and by extension Moscow does not represent the rest of Russia. The capital did experience serious disruption after the Moscow refinery in Kapotnya was damaged in mid-June by a Ukrainian drone. After that, long queues appeared. I saw plenty of them myself. I remember speaking actually to taxi drivers last month, and they were constantly complaining to me about how much working time they were losing by just being in queues constantly. However, by the middle of July, petrol and diesel supplies in Moscow and the surrounding region had largely stabilized, and the really long queues that were all over the city in late June had mostly disappeared. That improvement required a major effort to keep the capital supplied. Russian authorities have redirected petrol produced in the Urals and Siberia towards Moscow. Actually, fuel from the Achinsk refinery in Siberia's Krasnoyarsk region has been sent here to the capital rather than being spread around Siberia, and imports from Belarus have also increased. Additional deliveries brought to Moscow from other Russian regions have been estimated at several 100,000 tons of fuel. Russia's also begun importing fuel from India too. Moscow and its surrounding regions are home to around 23 million people, which is more than a sixth of Russia's entire population, and the region consumes approximately 6 million tons of petrol each year. It's also the country's wealthiest and most politically important region. And since Soviet times, the authorities have always they've prioritized supplies to the capital over the rest of the country, especially when goods have been scarce. So that's why the crisis here in Moscow is much less visible, while there are serious supply problems literally everywhere else in the country. The gap between Moscow and Russia can also, it can't just be seen with the eyes, of course. Like I said, one little petrol station is just anecdotal, but if you look in the data, it's very obvious that Moscow is getting all the supplies while a lot of the regions are not. So I'm at one pretty near mine right now, a petrol station. As you can see, it is closed. There's no cars can go and be refilled, but they do have prices, and you can see now a Rosneft truck thing delivering some fuel. So as I stand on a bridge now, I can see two separate petrol stations here, one from Lukoil and here from Teb Oil. And this is a good place enough to tell you that during one 24-hour period in mid-July, More than 85% of Moscow's petrol stations recorded at least one transaction, and across Russia as a whole, only around 2/3 of stations recorded activity. And those figures are based on payments recorded by 3 major banks. So of course they don't capture every cash purchase or every bank card, and it's not a perfect measurement, but it demonstrates a substantial regional divide. The national market here in Russia, it really appears to be gradually stabilizing, but recovery is definitely uneven. In some regions, drivers have faced limits on how much petrol they can buy, or there's bans on filling portable containers. In parts of Siberia, they've introduced distribution systems that prioritize emergency services, public transport, agriculture, municipal vehicles rather than private and personal vehicles. In Crimea, it's the place that has received the most restrictions in the whole of Russia. It's experienced rationing, suspension of public fuel sales, and restrictions that even affect public transport there. Of course, for most ordinary people, the main cost that they're facing, extra cost they're facing now is time. A queue lasting 20 or 30 minutes may not sound that dramatic, but when someone depends on their vehicle for work and faces that delay repeatedly, those lost hours really quickly accumulate. Taxi drivers therefore complete fewer journeys, and couriers can deliver fewer orders. Tradespeople reach fewer customers, and parents arrive late when picking up their children from school. These are like relatively minor things, but if you're stuck in that situation, it can feel like a disaster. In fact, workers who use their car may have to go home earlier and reject work because they don't know how long it's going to be until they can fill up their tank. So really the biggest problem for most Russians is it's time wasted and uncertainty. Because a driver may find petrol today, but might have no idea whether that same station they normally fill up from will have it tomorrow. So that encourages people to fill their tanks earlier, or buy more than they normally would, or buy more than they immediately need, which is a sort of panic buying, right? That just creates further problems for everyone. At a time when the country is low on fuel, people are buying more and more, which just creates a bigger and bigger problem. It just makes the people acting selfishly or in their own personal interest, maybe not selfishly, create problems for everybody else. So when thousands and thousands of people do that all at once, a limited shortage can quickly produce much longer queues. So here you can see this is a different one. Here, a Tatneft petrol station. They've still got the price and everything, but it's totally closed. There's nobody working here. Now, I mentioned two of the growing costs, which are time and uncertainty. But there's also the incredibly obvious cost, which is the actual price, the actual money price of all this, because fuel prices have jumped up. Petrol rose 5.8% during the first 3 weeks of July alone, and diesel increased 8.1% during that same period. Compared to July 2025, petrol is now up 31%. That's in 12 months. And of course, this is affecting absolutely everything. In fact, the Bank of Russia has said that the increased fuel prices have already begun feeding into the prices of a broad range of goods and services. In fact, on July 24th, the bank raised its forecast for annual inflation in 2026 to between 6 and 7%. Reality is it's much higher than that. The price of fuel is especially an issue outside of the capital. Someone living in Moscow may be able to leave their car at home and use the metro. Someone in a small town or a rural area may have no realistic alternative to driving. Because of course Russia is enormous, and outside of its largest cities, a car is often not a luxury. People may need one to reach work, collect children, visit a hospital, or just buy basic supplies. And in the capital here, imagine you're a taxi driver or a courier or anyone who earns money using a vehicle, higher petrol prices immediately reduce income. Of course, these people can decide to work longer hours or just accept a smaller profit from every journey, or simply increase what they charge. But whichever option they choose, someone is paying more. And like I said, the effect also reaches people who never actually drive, because almost every physical product has to be transported. Supermarkets need trucks, restaurants need ingredients delivered, online orders need couriers, pharmacies need regular deliveries of medicine. And when petrol and diesel becomes more expensive, transporting those products becomes more expensive too. So a business can easily absorb the extra cost temporarily. But the longer fuel prices remain elevated, the more likely those costs are to appear in shop prices, restaurant bills, and delivery charges and taxi fares. The fuel crisis is not responsible for every problem in the Russian economy, not even close, but it has now become large enough to influence inflation expectations, official forecasts, and interest rate decisions. So here you can see this petrol station across the road from me now. It's from a company called Neft Magistral, and they have no petrol at all. They've just got diesel, which is the number you see at the bottom, 95 rubles per litre, but all the grades of petrol above that say zero because they don't have any. So then, what happens next? Well, of course the central bank can try and fix inflation, but the central bank can't manufacture petrol or repair a refinery. And this whole situation is primarily a supply problem, which means that the most important response has to come from the government itself. What's the government doing? Well, it's redirecting fuel between Russian regions. It's increasing imports from friendly countries like India and Kazakhstan, and it's restricting exports to protect the domestic market. In fact, the government has extended its ban on petrol exports to the end of the calendar year, actually till the end of 2026. And yeah, these measures do appear to be somewhat helping to stabilise availability. And I can't squat any longer. So then, the main question, the main issue now for Russia is just how long this disruption is going to last. If damaged facilities are repaired and then remain operational for long, then of course availability should continue improving. However, if the strikes continue and additional refining capacity is lost, the government may have to maintain restrictions, arrange further imports, or continue moving petrol away from some regions to protect others. So, to answer the question I posed at the start of this video, is Russia's fuel crisis real, or is it just Western propaganda? Yes, it is real. The country is of course not running out of crude oil anytime soon, and the economy is not going to collapse because some drivers have had to wait a little bit longer at petrol stations. But there is a serious and tangible fuel shortage in many parts of the country. And for many Russians, it is just an annoyance rather than a catastrophe. But it's a real annoyance. It's cost people lots and lots of time. It's reduced the earnings of professional drivers. It's increased transport costs and placed additional pressure on household budgets that were already under significant pressure. Here in Moscow, the worst queues have disappeared, mainly because the capital has received priority. Additional supplies have been brought from other parts of the country, so Moscow gets fuel when other parts of the country don't. But yeah, the crisis may be gradually easing, but it's absolutely real, And don't believe anyone who tells you there is no fuel crisis in Russia. There absolutely is. You can even listen to Russian politicians. It's all they're talking about right now.